They laughed while she begged. Not all at once, just small sounds. There were 3 of them, 16 and 17 years old. They had already decided she was no longer a person. For more than 30 days, she existed only as something they could use, something they could hurt, something that reacted. They burned her skin with cigarettes. They cut into her body with knives. They beat her until even pain stopped surprising her. At first, they watched closely. They listened. They waited for screams, for movement, for fear. But as days passed, her reactions weakened. Her body learned what was coming. Her voice broke down from screaming and crying until nothing came out anymore. That was when boredom appeared. One of them felt it first. Not anger, not guilt, just the feeling that this wasn't fun anymore. The others understood immediately. They needed something new, something to make it exciting again. They decided to turn it into a game. They would cut her and compare the results. Whoever made the best wound won. The only rule was that she couldn't die. If she did, you lose. They laughed as they passed the knife around. They argued about how deep was too deep, about where to cut, about what kind of pain looked the most interesting. Her body became something to experiment on. By then, she could barely speak. Her throat was raw. Her voice was almost gone, but she managed to force out a few broken words. She didn't ask to be saved. She didn't ask to escape. She asked for it to end. That made them smile. Ending meant stopping. Stopping meant boredom. So they refused. They continued until there was nothing left to enjoy, until she stopped reacting completely, until her body was no longer anything but weight. When it was finally over, they sealed her inside concrete, put the drum onto a truck, left it on private land where no one would ask questions. Then they went home. When police received a report about a bad smell coming from illegally dumped waste, they expected trash, chemicals, something ordinary. They didn't expect a body. The concrete had preserved just enough to tell the story. The condition was so bad that even experienced detectives struggled to look for long. The forensic team worked in shifts because no one could stand being near her for too long. The investigation moved quickly, not because the boys were careful, but because they were careless. They had talked about it, bragged, treated it like something worth remembering. The arrests came 1 month later. The list of charges was long. Kidnapping, illegal confinement, repeated rape, torture, murder, disposal of a body. In court, the boys cried. They bowed. They apologized. They spoke about regret. The victim's family watched silently. They didn't cry. They had already done enough of that. The sentences were announced on a cold morning. 2 received 15 years. 1 received 5 to 10 years for cooperating. The system has decided, and time continued forward. 15 years passed. Enough time for people to forget. Enough time for anger to fade. Enough time for the system to decide that punishment had been served. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department looked like any other government building. Grey, plain, easy to ignore. Inside, 400 detectives handled the city's worst crimes. Some cases closed quickly. Others stayed unresolved for years. At the top of the first investigation division stood Hiroki Dan, 38 years old, young for his position, highly respected. He came from a wealthy family but chose fieldwork instead of comfort. Dangerous districts, long hours, the kind of work most people avoided. His closure rate was the highest in the department. He was calm, friendly, easy to talk to, the kind of leader people trusted. But he took his work seriously, very seriously. He read every major report, reviewed old cases, attended autopsies when he could. He wanted to understand crimes fully, not just solve them. Some detectives admired that. Others felt uneasy. Officer Shiba Kakeru noticed it too. As Dan's assistant, Shiba respected him deeply. During training, Dan was humble. During work, focused. Nothing about him seemed unstable, but there was an intensity beneath the surface. One day, Shiba learned about Dan's hobby, pottery. Dan worked with clay in his free time. It helped him relax. Later, during a briefing, someone mentioned news. One of the men from the concrete murder case was being released. The room went quiet. Older detectives remembered immediately. They spoke about the body, about the boys, about the trial. Shiba asked if they thought the men had changed. No one answered right away. One of the detectives spoke calmly. He said rehabilitation was important, but some crimes showed something deeper, something that couldn't always be fixed. That same day, Shishota stepped out of prison. Two familiar faces were waiting. The boys had changed, but not in the ways that mattered. Their bodies were older, their faces harder, but their voices carried the same ease, the same comfort with each other. They greeted each other like someone returning from a long trip, not from prison. They talked about time, about money, about how strange it felt to be outside again. No one mentioned her. No one needed to. They sat in a restaurant booth and ate food that tasted better than prison meals, but not good enough to remember. Around them, people talked and laughed, unaware of who sat nearby. As evening approached, their conversation drifted backward, toward memories they treated like stories, like moments frozen in time. They spoke about those days, not with shame, with nostalgia. They argued lightly about details, who did what, who went too far, who overreacted. Their voices were casual, almost playful, as if they were remembering an old game. They spoke about power, about how it felt to control someone completely, about how fear changed when it belonged to someone else. The city moved around them. Families went home. Lights turned on in apartment windows. That was when the planning became serious. They spoke about missing people, about how often it happened, about how rarely it was investigated. They spoke calmly, as if discussing weather. They understood the mistake they had made before. This time, they would be careful. This time, the body will not be found. When night came, they moved. The woman was alone, focused on her own world. She never noticed them until it was too late. Hands grabbed her, one over her mouth, one on her arm. They moved quickly, efficiently. Her struggle lasted seconds. The door closed. Inside the van, she cried. Her body shook as they restrained her. They told themselves it was easy. How unlucky this poor girl is. That this was simply how the world worked. They spoke casually, about turns, about waiting, about keeping her alive. At first, no one noticed anything wrong. The van rolled forward as planned. The city lights slid across the windows. Daichi sat in the front, relaxed, reaching for a cigarette as he talked about how easy it had been, about how careless the girl was for walking alone at night. In the back, Shota and Hiroshi stayed close to her. They tightened restraints, watched her panic, treated her fear like background noise. Then something felt wrong. In the back of the van, movement continued, struggling, fear. Noise. At first, Daichi didn't question it. Noise always faded. It always did. Then it faded too much. Not suddenly, just enough to feel wrong. Too quiet. The cigarette paused near his lips. He waited a second, expecting something. A cry, a shift, anything. The road stretched ahead. empty and dark. Nothing. Daichi glanced at the mirror. The shape behind him didn't make sense, so he turned around. The girl was sitting upright, too steady, too calm. Her hands moved with control. The wig slid away, revealing short hair beneath it, deliberate and clean. The disguise fell apart in one smooth motion. This wasn't a victim. It never had been. Daichi didn't react right away. His mind tried to fix the image, to force it back into something familiar. The cigarette burned down to his fingers before the pain registered. By then, it was already too late. The van drifted, controls slipped, and the night quietly changed direction. They woke up bound. Handcuffs cut into their wrists and ankles. Chains held them in place. The room no longer felt abandoned. It felt prepared. A figure stood in front of them. He was watching what appeared to be a movie. Nothing about him stood out, but the way he moved was calm, as if this place belonged to him. Their panic came fast. Questions, shouting, threats, desperate noise filling the space. Daichi tried to speak. The words came out sharp and confused, thrown at the space around him rather than at anyone in particular. He demanded to know where they were, what this place was. His voice bounced off the walls and came back smaller than he expected. Panic spread quickly after that. Shota shouted for him to stop, to not make things worse. The fear in his voice wasn't hidden anymore. It leaked through every breath. He had already decided this situation couldn't be fixed by force. Another thrashed against his restraints, crying and begging instead of threats. He sensed it instinctively. Whatever stood in front of them wasn't someone to provoke. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a fight they could win. Hiroki watched quietly. He spoke gently, not angry, as if he had waited a long time for this moment, savoring each and every second, watching these three men crying, begging, threatening him, trying to make sense of this moment. The detective watched them calmly as he raised a blade carefully. It rested in his hand naturally, as if it belonged there, as if it had always been part of the scene and simply hadn't been noticed yet. He told them shouting would only make things worse, that they needed to calm down, that fighting wouldn't change anything now. His voice carried no anger, just quiet certainty. Their noise filled the room anyway. Fear always made people loud, but the detective didn't raise his voice to compete with it. He simply waited, letting their panic exhaust itself, letting them understand, piece by piece, that volume no longer mattered here. Shouting was useless. They would learn that soon enough. Then he moved. The motion was fast, clean, practiced. Pain followed immediately. The screaming returned. Hiroki observed carefully, commented on his technique, on how different reality felt from fiction, on how much practice still mattered. When a blade stuck, he didn't panic. He simply reached for another. The room was full of weapons. You see? They asked why this was happening, if it was revenge, if this was about what they had done before. The answer was simple. It wasn't revenge. Revenge required attachment. This was something else. This was practice. This was justice, shaped by someone who believed balance mattered more than mercy. There were no windows, no clocks, only pain measured in moments. The figure worked slowly, carefully, learning as he went, adjusting angles, studying reactions. He kept them alive on purpose, just enough care to prevent death. This was not about ending them quickly. It was about understanding. Sometimes he spoke. He asked about prison, about their lives, about whether they remembered her name. They didn't. They begged. They cried. They asked to die. He refused. They had once found that request funny. Now they understood it. Days passed, or weeks, it no longer mattered. When it finally ended, there was nothing left to recognize. Hiroki cleaned his tools carefully, placed them back where they belonged, took some time for himself to enjoy his new prize for him to add to his collection. When dawn came, he left quietly. The city woke up, people went to work, life continued, unaware of what had been corrected in the dark. Back at the police department, Hiroki Dan returned to his routine: paperwork, meetings, calm conversations. At lunch, Shiba asked again about his pottery. Dan spoke softly, about masks, about expression, about how faces changed under real emotion. He showed another piece. This one was different, a mask. The expression was clear, fear. Shiba felt cold looking at it. Dan smiled gently. He said practice was paying off. That evening, alone in his office, Dan opened a locked drawer. Inside were files, photos, old cases. The concrete-encased murder case sat neatly on top. He closed the drawer. There was still more work to do, more good deeds to be done, and a world waiting to be made better.